Hey, what's up everyone? It's Chase, aka That Gay Jedi, and welcome back to my channel where I post new videos every single week covering and queering all things Star Wars. Now, today's video is kind of a rambly rant because I hear a lot of people talking about how politics has no place in Star Wars and that Star Wars isn't political, which, gotta say I disagree with, and that's fine, we can disagree, but I just wanted to share some observations I've made about politics and also queerness, of course, in Star Wars history and fandom. Without further ado, let's get into it. So when one takes all of the characters and plot points of the original Star Wars film, let's say A New Hope, and holds it up against the time in which that film was made, it's pretty clear to see just how closely the story mirrored the politics of the day. In 1973, when George Lucas sat down to write the first Star Wars, the United States had long been involved in the Vietnam War amidst significant national anti-war sentiment and protests, and the Watergate scandal and subsequent investigation had just begun. George Lucas himself has stated that the film was, quote, really about the Vietnam War, and that was the period where Nixon was trying to run for a second term. He continued to tell the Chicago Tribune that democracies aren't overthrown, they're given away.
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
Even throughout the era of the prequel trilogy, parallels were made between the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. In this instance, however, the critiques were made against then-President George W. Bush and then-VP Dick Cheney. Lucas himself is reported as saying that Bush is not unlike Vader, with Cheney acting as his master, Emperor Palpatine. Now, before I get too wrapped up into actual politics, I also want to mention that George Lucas has made it clear, time and time again, that a lot of inspiration for Star Wars has been taken from real life history and events, sure, but also from various folklores and mythologies throughout history. So it's not all just based off of modern day US politics. Now, regardless of how many direct parallels we can confirm as fact between Star Wars and real life politics, one thing is undoubtedly true, and that is Star Wars is political. And I'm sorry to those who do not like to hear it. The Star Wars franchise has a long history of telling subversive, anti-establishment, pro-underdog stories. I mean, even the way George Lucas shot the original film is at the very least in defiance of traditional Hollywood studio practices of the time. Furthermore, I believe that Star Wars from its very inception was queer. Queer not only in the way that it was written, directed, and produced, but queer in its characters and plot points and themes. Now, when I talk about Star Wars being queer, I'm referring less to the personal identifier of queer and more so the reading of something as queer as it relates to queer theory. And for those unfamiliar with queer theory, the best, most concise definition I could find comes from University of Illinois at Chicago. Queer theory is both theory and political action. Definition is impossible, but it can be summarized as exploring the oppressive power of dominant norms, particularly those relating to sexuality, and the immiseration they cause to those who cannot or do not wish to live according to those norms. In analyzing the power of the normal, queer theory contributes to a politics and ethics of difference. It challenges dominant norms, especially those of sexuality. So while a large part of queer theory does have to do with gender and sexuality, it also encompasses a lot more than that. It signifies a challenge to any norm and fluidity to standardized societal binaries. Even just this brief definition of queer theory evokes countless themes from the Star Wars franchise. Fighting against oppression and assigned social norms just as the rebels fight against the tyranny of the Empire, and grappling with one's identity and sense of self, just like Luke rejecting the dark side and proudly proclaiming himself a Jedi. And not to mention, the sheer size of the galaxy with all of its inhabitants seems to, however indirectly, acknowledge the broad spectrum and fluidity of sexuality, orientation, and identity. Now, switching gears to the fanbase itself, the Star Wars fanbase is, whether people want to believe it or not, just as diverse as the Star Wars galaxy itself. Global Web Index, a market research company, surveyed internet users who are fans of Star Wars and found that the franchise stretches itself almost evenly across multiple qualifiers. However, as most of us know, the fandom can be a pretty tricky space to navigate, especially for those who don't fit the molds of the majority. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do think that the fandom is a fairly positive space, and increasingly so, especially for those who have found their niche corners of fandom to enjoy. However, as a whole, there has been a steady track record of toxicity and slipping to the dark side, shall I say. I don't think I have to get into too many of the dirty details. I think we all know sort of the places that the fandom can get to, but I hope we can all work to make the fandom a more inclusive, positive space for everyone, and also to reflect the faraway galaxy that we all adore so much. Another thing I wanted to mention is that when I search for gay Star Wars content online, all I really get are articles about the queer baiting between Finn and Poe in the sequel trilogy, as well as the representation we got at the end of The Rise of Skywalker with the lesbian kiss far in the background that lasted about 2.2 seconds that you had to squint to see. Anyways, of course, there's amazing queer Star Wars content that is out there, but I don't feel like the queer Star Wars community necessarily has a online community to go to, a safe space for us all to exist and share thoughts and share art and share experiences as queer Star Wars fans. And honestly, that's kind of where my channel comes into play. More than anything, I want this channel to be a beacon that attracts all Star Wars fans to come together, celebrate, and bond over the queer sides of Star Wars, because there are a lot of queer sides to Star Wars. I also want to amplify the voices and works of other queer Star Wars content creators that give so much to the fandom, whether it's through their cosplay, fan art, fan fiction, podcasting, blogging, whatever it is. There is so much queer content that is put into the fandom that deserves to be celebrated. I also just want to share a lot of my own opinions on what makes me resonate so much with Star Wars and all the different Star Wars themes and characters and stories that feel so queer to me, while also hopefully having meaningful conversations about why that's important and what representation means and why that's so important, especially in a galaxy with over 20 million sentient species. And with all of that being said, what do you think? Is there queerness in Star Wars? Could it get queerer? Let me know down below in the comments, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel because I put out queer Star Wars content every single week. I truly am so excited to grow this inclusive, supportive, queer Star Wars community with all of you. So thank you so much for watching, and until the next video, may the Force be with you always.